Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. If you haven't been here before, my name is Debbie and I read a lot of books. Today I am talking about the I just have to check how many, the 5 books that I read while I was on holiday. The first 3 I read on BorrowBox, which is an app connected to my local library and connects to libraries across the country. It's great if you spend a lot of money on books and you think, oh, I need to stop doing that. Because it's connected to libraries, it means the app is free and you don't have to pay to read the books. So the other 2 are books that were at the place that we stayed. There were books everywhere. And I was just like, I need to read some of these books. So the last 2 were books that belonged to the hosts, I think. But yeah, so the first book was The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. I finished that one on the plane. The one after that was The Flower Girls by Clarke-Platts. Then Everville by Clive Barker, then Who's Lying Now by Susan Lewis, and Missing Presumed by Susie Steiner. There is a theme with the books that I read, except for Everville, which is more of horror. All of them were mystery, detective type. The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley, to be honest, I enjoyed all of these. I think if I had to put them in order, I'd put The Paris Apartment and Who's Lying Now kind of in joint first place, and then The Flower Girls because I really enjoyed that, then Missing Presumed, and then Everville, because I did enjoy Everville, but it was a very long book, and I think it's one of those books that you kind of have to be in the mood for. I definitely read it quicker than I read the first book of the art, which was... no, name of the first book is gone. But yeah, this is the second book of the art, and the third book of the art has not been released. I think these ones were released in like the 80s and the 90s, and Clive Barker just has not. I don't even know if he started the third book. But apparently he's been kind of in the process of trying to write it since Everville, but he just hasn't found the right story to tell. And having read Everville, I do wonder what he would do. Anyway, let's try and do this in order, shall we? Let's just get comfy. So, The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. Let's get up to the blurb for that one, shall we? Welcome to number 12, Rue des Amants. A beautiful old apartment block far from the glittering lights of the Eiffel Tower and the bustling banks of the Seine, where nothing goes unseen and everyone has a story to unlock. The watchful concierge, the scorned lover, the prying journalist, the naive student, the unwanted guest. Something terrible happened here last night. A mystery lies behind the door of apartment 3. Only you and the killer hold the key. It was 416 pages in crime, thriller, detective and literary fiction, and I'd heard so much about this book. It was one of those books that was kind of everywhere for quite a long time. To be honest, I think it still kind of is. I've seen quite a few people at work, lots of guests, with this book in their hands. I'm just like, oh, that was been on my to-read list. What do you think? And they all say that it is absolutely brilliant. And I really did enjoy it. As I said, I read the majority of this on the plane on the way to Barbados, and I just could not put it down. So you start off meeting Ben. It's obvious that something happens to him in his apartment in Paris. He's on the phone to his sister when he is attacked from behind, and you spend the majority of the book with his sister trying to find out what happened. And in regards to the list of people in the blurb, basically there is connection between quite a lot of the characters that I'll admit I didn't see coming. And looking back, I'm just like, were there any hints about what that connection was? Because Ben is a journalist, and a lot of the time he's just doing like reviews and things, but he stumbles upon a story which he starts to make notes about, and when his sister finds his diary, she's just there going, hang on, what did he stumble upon? What is going on in this apartment building? And she's just there trying to connect the dots, and yeah, it was so good. It just, when you realise the connection that's happening between the main people you are seeing in this building and what things they kind of stumble upon throughout the story, it's so clever. It is so clever, and I really enjoyed it. So the other book was The Flower Girls, Clarke-Platts. The Flower Girls, Laurel and Primrose. One convicted of murder, the other given a new identity. Now 19 years later, another child has gone missing, and the Flower Girls are about to hit the headlines all over again. Yeah, this is kind of a flashback situation where you see what's happening in the present and then you go back to the past and you're trying to find out what happened, basically. In the beginning you see two young girls take the hand of a young baby toddler and walk her away to play, basically, and you find out that the baby died. I will say there is lots of reference to the James Bulger case. If you're British, you'll definitely know about that, and if you don't, then there is a Wikipedia page. I don't want to talk about it too much because it's a very, very hard... I mean, to be fair, there's lots of references to it throughout this book because of the context of the book. The two girls who were with the baby when the baby died are dubbed the Flower Girls because they're called Laurel and Primrose, and one of them is of an age where she can be arrested. The other one is too young, so one of them is arrested for the death of the child and the other one is given a new identity. And you meet that new identity, Hazel, at a hotel where she's with her boyfriend and his daughter. So another child goes missing while Hazel is at the hotel, she panics and is just there going, I've moved on, I have grown up, nobody knows who I am. But in this investigation to what happened to this child today, am I going to have my identity exposed? And somebody at the hotel figures out who she is. And so throughout the book you follow Hazel and the investigation into the new child that's gone missing. You get the flashbacks as to what happened with the baby, with Laurel and Primrose. And yeah, Hazel is Laurel, and she's been given a new identity. Primrose is in prison, Prim, and she is now in her mid-20s. And yeah, you just follow that investigation. It was so interesting. It's very, very hard-hitting. I have seen some reviews where people say about how they didn't really like how many references there were to the real-life case that it's influenced by. And I don't think... It wasn't completely necessary to include it because I think any Brits who... Well, a lot of... I'm not going to say all Brits because I'm sure there'll be some younger people who don't know about that, but it is a very, very famous case in the UK. Yeah, because the real life case happened in '93, so I was 4 when it happened. But yeah, it's a very, very hard-hitting book, and seeing the investigation, and I must admit, the end, I definitely did not see coming. It kind of ends on a question mark. Yeah, I don't want to spoil it, but it's very interesting how it's looked at and the twist and finding out who was actually responsible for the death of the baby in the flashbacks. Very, very interesting book that's kind of detectives, kind of teetering on the horror side with what happens to the baby. The Flower Girls, Alice Clarke-Platts. The next one was Everville by Clive Barker. This was another one read on Burrowbox. Let's get the blurb up for that one. On a mountain peak high above the city of Everville, a door stands open onto the shores of the dream sea, Quiddity. And there's not a soul below who'll not be changed by that fact. Phoebe Cobb, once a doctor's receptionist, is about to forget her old life and go looking for her lost lover, Joe Flicker, in the strange sensual wonderland on the other side of the door. Tesla Bombeck, who knows what horrors lurk on the far side of Quiddity, must solve the mysteries of the city's past if she is to keep those horrors from crossing the threshold. Harry Damore, who has traced the ultimate evil across America, will find it conjuring atrocities in the sunlit streets of Everville. This one was 600 pages in fantasy, horror and supernatural ghost. It's target audience adult, 15 plus. I feel like it shouldn't be a young adult target audience because it gets very dark, so I put it just more in just general adult. This is kind of thing, like if it was a horror movie, I imagine it would be put in an 18, because it's scary at certain parts. It does tie in a lot of stuff from the first book, which, to be honest, I did enjoy the first book. Is it on here, or is it upstairs? I said upstairs. No, because I've read it, it'll be up there. Because I've read it, it'll be on the top of my wardrobe. I need to organise all those books at some point. But yeah, it does tie in a lot of the stuff. I keep going out for it. It does tie in a lot of the stuff from the first book and continues, and it's at the beginning you meet a young girl called Maeve and her father. Her father meets a guy called Buddenbaum. Is it Owen Buddenbaum? I just remember the name Buddenbaum, who convinces Maeve's father to create a city, basically, which becomes Everville. But Maeve's father dies before it can be created, so Maeve decides she's going to carry on and do what her father couldn't and create Everville. Maeve is a very important part of Everville's history, but in the modern day, which in this case I think was about the 90s. It just says this version was released in 2014 because it's an ebook. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was the 90s that this book was released. But yeah, so you start off with Maeve and her father, and then through the rest of it, I feel like you're mainly getting Tessa's story, who is mainly nicknamed Tess. And yeah, a lot happens in this book. It is one of those ones where I think I did glaze over a couple of times while I was reading it, and it can be a hard read, but it was definitely easier to read than the first book. And yeah, as I said, I did enjoy it, but I think of the 5 books that I read while I was on holiday, I would put this in 5th place in regards to like favourites. But there are some truly gross parts. I mean, I think any fans of Clive Barker and horror probably would enjoy it. But yeah, it just feels like there's a lot happening. There's a lot of characters you're following. The first book, it seemed a lot more centralised, whereas this, it feels like it branches out quite a lot. There's definitely ghosts in this book. There's when certain characters die, you then follow their story on with them as a ghost as well. So yeah, it just feels like a lot happens, but it does help to kind of tie into the first book and help to wrap up a couple of loose ends from the first book, as well as tying up quite a lot of this book, which is why I do wonder where book 3 of the art would go, because it's supposed to be a trilogy. Yeah, Everville, Clive Barker. The next book was Who's Lying Now by Susan Lewis. Jenny Simmons is a force to be reckoned with, an eccentric, award-winning publisher spending lockdown with her husband in a house near Casterly-on-Sea. She seems to have it all, a high-flying career, a happy marriage, a niece she adores. And then one day, she vanishes. Cara Jakes is a new trainee investigator, young, intelligent, and eager to prove herself. When she teams up with Detective Andy Lawrence to look into the disappearance, she's determined to find out what really happened to Jenny. Cara begins to question the residents of this close-knit community, sure that someone has a secret to hide. But how can she separate the truth from the lies? So, you can imagine that everybody in this book has a secret. You've got, is it like 4 sets of neighbours, I think, that you're mainly looking at? And everybody is hiding something. And so it's just really a case of trying to figure out who's lying, as per the title. I find it really interesting because I've read another book that was kind of set in the pandemic, and I think it's a really interesting setting for a mystery, especially because the last one that I read, the killer used the pandemic to realise that nobody could figure out what happened. It ended not all wrapped up in a bow, and with the person getting away with it because of the pandemic, and I was wondering if whoever did it would get away with it because of the pandemic. The relationships between these neighbours are just completely tangled up. So you've got Guy, who is Jenny's husband, and he's a surgeon. Jenny published Estelle's book, but Jenny and Estelle had a massive falling out back in the day after the release of the first book, to the point where Estelle and Jenny pretty much hate each other. Throughout the book, I hated Estelle. I hated Esty, that's her nickname throughout the book, Esty. And I really hated Estelle. I really hated her. And I just thought, if it comes out that she was involved, I wouldn't be surprised. Because she's one of those people that really holds a grudge. And she seemed incredibly selfish. And she did not seem to want to acknowledge her part in the falling out with Jenny. And, yeah. Is it Jenny? Is it Jeannie? Because it's spelled Geanie. But in my mind, I was just pronouncing it Jenny. I don't know why. Yeah, and then Estelle's husband is Neil. Neil was previously married to Fliss, who owns the local cafe, and she's the mother of Neil's son, Zach. It sounds complicated, but when you're reading it, it doesn't feel as complicated. You kind of fall into that pattern quite quickly of like who's who and how they're related to each other, but it is very twisty. as you find out the connections and the things that people are keeping to themselves. And yeah, it's mainly focused on Jenny's disappearance. You see her last day before she disappears at the very beginning of the book, and then it goes into the complete puzzle of what everybody's doing and the relationships. But yeah, as I said, I really hated Estelle. I found her incredibly selfish, and yeah, it's obvious that she's holding a grudge, and she constantly doesn't tell enough to the people investigating. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed Who's Lying Now, because it's just that perfect puzzle. The perfect puzzle, and just putting it all together was just brilliant. And I like the fact that at the end, even when it's wrapped up, there is still a question mark over it. By the time it got to the end, I had to kind of reread a couple of bits a few times, because it was just like, wait, is that putting a question mark over who we think did it? Yeah, it's just, yeah, very, very interesting. The next book is Missing Presumed by Susie Steiner. This one is actually one of a series, so let's get it with the blurb for this one. A missing girl. Edith Hind is gone, leaving just her coat, a smear of blood and a half-open door. A desperate family. Each of her friends and relatives has a version of the truth, but none quite adds up. A detective at breaking point. The press get hungrier by the day. Can DS Mann and Bradshaw fend them off before a missing persons case becomes a murder investigation? This was a proper page turner. I finished this in one day. I think I read the first chapter the night before, and then the next day I pretty much read all of it. And yeah, People Else in Hollywood was just like, yeah, Debs has just got ahead in a book. Nearly all times. I will say though, I got a lot done on this holiday. At the beginning, you'll see getting the point of view of Edith's friends and her family when they realise that her home door is wide open, and you've got the blood, and people are just like, oh my god, what on earth has happened? She's just disappeared. And you get the point of view of her boyfriend, her best friend who she was on a night out with that night before she disappeared, her family, and everybody. Like Who's Lying Now, everybody is keeping a secret about something. Whether it's her best friend regarding her relationship, the boyfriend who you can't quite read because he's just not very good at showing emotion, her family, her mum and dad, who seem to have a weird relationship happening, and yeah, where it went, I definitely wasn't expecting. And the way that they finally tie in other things that have happened in regards to like other people who have died and things like that. It definitely didn't go where I thought it was going to go. And when it all came out, it's just like, bloody hell, where did that come from? It's not completely out of left field based on the behaviour of some people throughout the book, but it was one of those things where it's just like, wait, oh my god. It was a reason why I did this one in one day, because, to be fair, I did the Paris apartment pretty quickly, because I think I'd started that like a couple of days before, and then read the majority of it on the plane. The Flower Girls I did in about 2 days. Everville took me about 4 days, I think. I was trying to read it in like 100-page increments if possible. Who's Lying Now was read quite quickly. I think that was about 2 days. And this was over a 2-week holiday. I don't know how I did it. But yeah, Innocent Presumed, it was just so good. It was just so good. But I must admit, there were points when Manon, the main detective, really annoyed me. It's one bit in particular where, you know, she's a detective. She should know better in regards to some of the things that annoyed me. And one in particular was when she gets into the car with another detective and she puts her feet up on the dash. And the guy who's driving looks at her as if to say, get your feet down. And she just there going, but it's not your car. And it's like, that's not the point. The point is that if there is an accident, your legs will go through your head. You will break your legs if there is an accident with your legs in that position. And so when I read that, I don't know why that annoyed me so much. I think a lot of people don't realise the issue with that, because I see a lot of American vloggers when like they film in cars. So many times I see them with their feet up on the dashboard, and I'm just like, oh, please put your feet down, because if there is an accident, that will hurt. But yeah, and this was set in Britain. This was set in London. And so the idea of a detective not realising the issue with putting her feet up on the dashboard in the car, it really annoyed me. But there is also a point when she starts a relationship with a man who was involved in the case. And I just kept thinking, is it going to come out that he was involved more than we think? Because it just seemed to... To be fair, it didn't go in the direction I thought it was, but the idea of Manon having a relationship with somebody who they spoke to in regards to Edith's disappearance just left a really bad taste in my mouth, because I just thought that just feels so inappropriate. I just found Manon incredibly naive and unprofessional at certain points in the story, and to be honest, it could be something that's kind of adds to the series in regards to her growing up, but she feels incredibly immature. It feels weird that I'm spending so much time talking about Manon when it's about the mystery, but I think it's probably because it has so much focus on Manon because it becomes a series. I don't know, but yeah, I don't want to waffle on for ages, but yeah, so those are the 5 books: The Paris Apartment, Lucy Foley; The Flower Girls, Alice Clarke-Platts. That's really difficult to say. Alice Clarke-Platts. Everville by Clive Barker. Who's Lying Now by Susan Lewis. And then Missing Presumed by Susie Steiner. As I said, I would put books The Paris Apartment and Who's Lying Now at joint first place. Then The Flower Girls. Then Missing Presumed. And then Everville in 5th place in regards to enjoyment and favourites. I wouldn't say that I hated any of these books. All of them had me gripped and wanting to know more. Can you tell? I like my murder mysteries and my detective series when all of these had elements of that. If anybody else has read any of these books, talk to me in the comment. I'd love to hear what other people thought about these books. But yeah, the fact that I do have a running theme through all 5 books is quite impressive, really. But yeah, so thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you're not already, and I will see you next time with another video. Bye.